Hi, my name is Jeff Colgan, and I am the director of the Climate Solutions Lab here at the Watson Institute. And today we're going to talk to the directors of a fascinating new movie called Kiss the Ground. But before I do so, let me just say a little word about the two co-sponsors of this event. One of them is the John F. Kennedy Jr. Initiative for Documentary Film and Social Progress here at the Watson Institute, which has been spearheaded by Kennedy's family, friends, and classmates. The initiative aims to bring film and filmmakers to the university with the goal of shedding light on some of the most urgent, challenging, and complex issues facing society through the prism of documentary. And the Climate Solutions Lab is a new body at the Watson Institute, started in September 2020, with the aim of increasing our institute's focus on climate change, and in particular, looking at solutions that overcome the kind of path dependence or inertia that have become obstacles to the gravest threat of our time, namely climate change. So the plan for today is for me to have a chance to talk with the directors for about 30 or 40 minutes, but then we'll open up the floor to live Q&A from you, the audience, and very much welcome questions. There should be a box at the bottom of your screen called Q&A, and at any point, please hit that button and you can type in your questions there. And so then when we get to that part of the program, I will read those questions to our guests. And speaking of, let me just introduce Josh and Rebecca Tickell. They are both directors, but let me start with Josh, who is the author of 4 books, and he's worked on environmental issues for over 20 years. His career spans this fascinating mixture of science, journalism, and filmmaking. He was the director of the movie Fuel, which in 2008 won the Sundance Audience Award for the winning documentary that investigates the possible replacement of fossil fuels with renewable energy. His 2017 Simon & Schuster book, Kiss the Ground, How the Food You Eat Can Reverse Climate Change, Heal Your Body, and Ultimately Save Our World, was an Amazon bestseller in multiple categories, and I'm guessing that it has something to do with the movie that we watched today, or at least many of us watched today. And Rebecca Tickell is a director, producer, and environmental author and activist. She produced the Sundance Audience Award-winning environmentally themed movie Fuel, and co-directed and co-produced The Big Fix, an official selection of the 2011 Cannes Film Festival. So she spent several years documenting the impacts and the root causes of the BP oil spill. I could go on. They have really impressive CVs, but maybe I'll stop there and save them from any more. And just ask you to say hi and just to help us remember the core messages from this wonderful film that you've offered for us.
Great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Jeff. And it's wonderful to be here with everybody, even though we can't see everyone this evening. We know you're there. And, just to kind of dive into Kiss the Ground, the movie is really about this concept that's very simple. It's regeneration. What is regeneration? It is kind of a mixture of regrowth and rebuilding in an environmental sense, in an ecological sense. In another sense, it is the operating system of nature. Very simply, like when we think about regeneration, it's simple to think about something that we can visualize, like you take a leaf off of a tree, it grows a new leaf. And that's in the plant world. In the animal kingdom, if a lizard loses its tail, it can regrow its tail. And so what Kiss the Ground really focuses on, those are micro examples. What we focus on is macro examples. Can we take deserts, turn them back into forest? Can we take continents that have been denuded of topsoil, regrow the topsoil such that entire ecosystems come back to life? And can we ultimately take the planet, 2/3 of which, the topsoil of which is gone? Can we take it and regenerate it so that the mass of ecosystemic activity actually sequesters carbon, balances water cycles and temperatures, and creates a new viable agriculture for our species? And so it's a big picture, big question kind of film. And I think it's for us the first work that we did on regeneration. It certainly won't be the last film that we do on it, but it broaches these subjects in a way that we tried to make relatively accessible and simple. Woody Harrelson narrating and graphics of things that you can visualize, so that we had a broad audience, hopefully, for what would have otherwise been a little bit of a boring science topic. At the end of the day, this could be the most pivotal topic to the trajectory of human life on this planet. So yeah, it's good to start simple, but it's also good to get in those big ideas right away.
Terrific. And Rebecca, I want to bring you in as well. What do you hope that your audience will take away from this film?
Honestly, what I hope the audience will take away is nothing less than having had a kind of enlightenment from getting the information that the film contains. Because certainly that's been our experience. I wouldn't say we're enlightened, but I would say that humanity, since the dawn of time, somehow has managed repeatedly to desertify wherever our surroundings are of our cultures. I mean, over and over and over, we've done this to different regions. And now we're doing it as a global species. Like we're doing this around the planet, we're desertifying ourselves. And so I really hope that when people watch this film, there is this kind of consciousness that happens where they realize, wow, this is a behavior that's happened since the dawn of time that I've inherited. And I recognize this behavior in me, and I can see how I'm participating in ultimately the global desertification of the planet. And hallelujah, there actually is hope. There really is a way forward where we can pull ourselves up out of that muck of despair and paralysis, which is where we've been really around the conversation of climate change for the last decade, and move into one of taking action. Is it perfect? Do we know everything? Do we have all of the science? No, this is an emerging movement that is coalescing and has been coalescing over the 7 years that we've been making the film. So we're learning new things about it all the time. But hands down, overall, the science says we can draw down 100% of the carbon that we put up into the atmosphere since pre-industrial revolution. And we can actually not only store it all in the ground, reverse the ocean acidification that we have and all of the other climatological issues that we're facing with carbon in the atmosphere, some of which we may not be able to undo for a while, but we can undo it. And there's a pathway to where, 50 years from now, we really are regenerative. It's not just sustainability, which is what we've been talking about for a long time. It's not degeneration, which is what we've been doing for a long time. It literally is a step beyond that. It's regeneration. And that's where we need to be to really have a real conversation about climate change and what we're going to do about it. So it's a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call for us, and I hope it's a wake-up call for others as well, and that one that inspires hope.
Terrific. And I think, even in the trailer to the movie, the lines from Woody Harrelson expressing hope, the understanding the gravity of climate change, but then being able to see that there is something that we can do, I think is one of the real strengths of the film. So tell me, you mentioned, this film took 7 years, and so tell us a little bit about what you learned over those 7 years. What made you, go in this particular direction with the film as opposed to maybe some other direction?
We had 15 versions of the film, if you can believe it, over the course of 7 years. So we went a lot of different directions with it. And we had a version that we really loved, and it didn't have celebrities in it. But it wasn't going to reach 1 billion people like we wanted with the film. And actually, we've reached 1 billion people. 1 billion people have, come in contact with Kiss the Ground in some shape, form, or another. And that was just in the first 90 days. And so, we we wanted to tell the story that was going to really have us reach that tipping point. And so there was a lot of different versions. And ultimately, the one that we got to was one that really, it didn't have a lot of extra stuff. It was really like, what do we do with all the carbon, and where are we going to put it, and how can, what does that look like? And that's, a movie about dirt. Boy, you can imagine how excited we were to make that film after we had made, 3 movies on oil. We thought the only thing worse than making 3 movies on oil, or harder from a storytelling perspective, would be making a movie on soil. And so, 8 years ago, we were, dumb enough or inspired enough or whatever it was to start that process. And it definitely, I think at one point they were like, that would make a really great college seminar. They're like, you should give that to colleges for free. We're like, well, we are planning to do that, but that's not all we wanted to do with the film. So we realized that we were going to have to get some star power in there for us to take this concept and reach more people.
Terrific.
But how do you tell a story about carbon? It's like, it's invisible, it's from a storytelling, like hero's journey perspective, it was a challenge.
Well, that's exactly right. And some of the, for a movie about dirt, it has some dramatic visuals in the picture. And so I want to ask you, Josh, about some of those, right? So some of the ones that I found most dramatic, let me just mention 3, right? There was one that was like the NASA pictures of the CO2 emissions in April versus June, right? Where you see this like burst of carbon dioxide emissions in the tilling season. And then the overhead pictures of the grazing ranch versus the feedlot ranch that are juxtaposed. And then the third one about the amount of nitrogen used to make a bushel of wheat in the year 2000 versus the year 1960. And so 3, I thought, pretty dramatic images. And I wonder what you hoped your audience would take away from those visuals. How did you imagine using those visuals in the story?
Well, it's interesting. All 3 of those visuals are intimately related. So you're talking about a NASA, basically a supercomputer generated satellite imagery, which shows that throughout the cycle of the year, there's tremendous amounts of carbon dioxide that gets released specifically in the Northern Hemisphere, specifically around the season where we till or plow, which we do on a massive scale. I mean, the United States is 10% of the world's agricultural land. Combine that with the EU, combine that with Russia, the Northern Hemisphere is this sort of agricultural powerhouse representing, anywhere from 20 to 40% of the total agricultural area. The difference is the Northern Hemisphere tends to be very industrial in the way we do agriculture. Vast majority of farms in the world are small farms, less than 3 acres. But it's contrasted. The vast majority of agriculture in the Northern Hemisphere is fossil fueled machines. So that one image where you see the red kind of spreading across the world, and you realize, my God, this is directly in line with our industrial use of fossil fuels to kind of plow up the ground, and that releases a tremendous amount of CO2. Well, you've got another graphic there that shows that in order to grow a bushel of wheat, it requires more nitrogen now than before. Why would it require more nitrogen? We're more efficient, we have better machinery, we have precision agriculture GPS, we know every position point on a field where the crops have to be sprayed or irrigated. And the reason is because soil is the stabilizer of nitrogen. Managed properly, soil will, with the assistance of legumes or some combination of cover crop, will pull nitrogen down into the ground. Now there's 50 tons of soil, 50 tons of nitrogen over every acre of soil in the world. And we don't need to ostensibly add nitrogen via chemical means if we're bringing it down to the soil. But if the soil is denuded of plant life, it's denuded of microbial life. If the soil is becoming basically silica sand, then you've got to add everything back in. You've got to add the chemicals back in. You've got to rebuild the basic chemical infrastructure. The difference in thinking is, well, a plant is actually living from a myriad of nutrients, not just nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, which is what we've been adding for the past 70 years. And so what we've been able to do is we've been able to simplify the plant's diet. And in so doing, we've continued to degrade the soils, meaning more chemicals to get that same plant to reach that same level. We've focused on quantity produced, not quality. So while we're propping these plants up and they look big, disease is increased in the plant. We have less nutrients overall in the plant, which means everything that's eating the plant has less nutrients, us or the animal that we eat. And so as the soil degrades, the nutrition goes down, and we've just got to prop this whole system up with more and more and more chemicals. So yeah, the NASA graphic shows that the carbon is being released from the soil. As the carbon's released, the soil is degraded. As the soil is degraded, more inputs to get the same crop, right? And then you mentioned one other, which is the feedlot versus the grass finished or pasture system on which cows are grazed. And this is basic kind of, it follows from the other two things. If we're degrading the soil such that the basic nutrients, not just chemicals, but nutrients are missing in the plants, then the animals won't have them either, which is why we have, from a human nutrition standpoint, two very different vectors. We've got the feedlot situation where you're pumping a bunch of chemicals and mixed feed, meaning corn, basically, into cows. And you've got the pasture raised system, which mimics the bison, which built the topsoils of the United States and North America. In the pasture system, not surprisingly, ecology begins to regenerate, carbon gets pulled down, and it's a system. It's a managed ecology. So the ecology is interacting with the chemical in the atmosphere, in this case, carbon dioxide gas, in a way that would have occurred in a natural ecosystem where herds are being managed across the land by wolves that are chasing bison or buffalo, right? So all of those three graphics represent a cycle that we've involved ourselves in order to get bigger crops, more efficient meat, more meat. The only problem with that whole system, we've degraded the soil and we've degraded the nutrition. So now we end up with sick land, sick animals, and not surprisingly, sick humans. And the flip side is true as well. We can regenerate the system so that we have healthy land, healthy plants, and healthy animals. And that's the basic A/B test over and over again and kiss the ground. Do you want this future or do you want that future? Do you want to eat this or do you want to eat that? One leaves you healthy, the other leaves you sick. Where do you want to be?
Fantastic. So well explained. When you talk about regeneration, it's really a striking metaphor, not just a metaphor, it's a message about this. And I wonder whether, again, sort of going back to the years that you put into putting the film together, was there a moment where you had kind of an aha discovery about regeneration, or when did you decide, like, okay, this needs to be right at the core of what this film is all about?
I mean, I think carbon was for this particular film, carbon was the driver.
Yeah.
It always was the core.
I think we tried to deviate from that many times.
Yeah. And
when that happened, it would fall apart. That's why it took us part of why it took us so long. I mean, honestly, part of what took us so long was because the science and the data and all that stuff was coming together over the course of those years. But yeah, I think it's hard. Like I said, it's hard to tell a story about something that you can't see, that's invisible, that it's like, asking us to all agree to completely change our behavior based on something that's completely invisible, like this invisible threat, but that we trust based on science and based on our own sort of firsthand experiences that this is real. So it's like, but if we look at ourselves like this massive organism that's all connected on this one thing, I think the aha is like, we have to stop trying to control nature. That was my aha. My aha is that there's no reinventing of nature. There's no technology that we can come up with that is going to create better than what was here when we showed up. Our job is to integrate in that. Nature is regenerative. That is nature of our existence here. But if we are trying to separate things constantly, you know, try to the extractive kind of thinking and model, and, you know, we just have managed to do that, like we were talking about earlier, you know, in these regions, and we can still see the Fertile Crescent, you know, a desert. It takes a long time to turn a desert back into a forest or a jungle, but it can be done. There is this kind of biological memory that if you start to bring life back in, it will start to regrow. And I think, you know, that thinking of regeneration, that is inherent and innate in all of us, and we all can tap into that. The wisdom is there, but trying to control it and separate it and use chemicals, you know, that aren't really for our benefit, that are really more about, you know, the corrupt and broken system, the food system that we currently have, you're going to find one that's only perpetuating more of what I think we're hoping that people have this kind of breakthrough around when they watch the film. Yeah, it was an aha. We can't do it better than nature. Nature does it great.
Great. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the sort of the scope of the impact. And to do that, let me just say a word about Bill Gates has this new book out on climate change. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but he gives 5 questions to ask in every climate conversation. And one of them is, how much of the 51 billion tons are we talking about? And he's referring to the 51 billion tons of greenhouse gas humanity pours into the atmosphere each year. And so while I don't expect you to have an exact number in mind, I wonder if you could give us a sense of the impact we might have if, hypothetically, every farmer on Earth started to adopt the practices that you describe. How much of the problem could we address that?
Well, I think, you know, Bill Gates puts forward a good question. I think it is, I think it's shooting a little low, and I think its scope is a little small. And the reason, if you watch Kiss the Ground, you know, look, it's a 90-minute movie. You've got a lot to do. You've got to take people on a journey and convey a lot of information. So obviously we couldn't do everything. But one of the most important things that we did get across in the film is, let's say we stopped all carbon dioxide emissions today. Just, you know, we did that for a little while during COVID. The climatological effects of carbon in the atmosphere don't stop. Because since the birth of Industrial Revolution, we've essentially emitted 1,000 gigatons or a teraton of CO2. That CO2 doesn't just go away because we stop adding to the pile. The pile is essentially there in the atmosphere. So if we're talking about just mitigating the CO2 emitted on a year-and-year basis, we're screwed. It's really myopic, small thinking. I'm not criticizing you, Jeff, but I am kind of, you know, throwing it back in Mr. Gates' face, because I think this is the thinking that has had us stymied in the climate movement for 20-something years. Is just, how do we mitigate? How do we just make it a little less worse? You know, can we not hit the brick wall at quite the speed? Can we maybe go from 60 miles an hour to like 55? That'll make it better. It's you know, it's like splitting hairs at that point. What we look at when we look at regeneration and drawdown is there are really only 3 carbon sinks that we have access to as a species that lives on this planet. We have the ocean, the atmosphere, and the land, right? So the ocean, we know, turns CO2 into carbonic acid. It has absorbed as much as it possibly can. It is becoming acidic. We can't really rely on putting more in the ocean. In terms of the atmosphere, we've seen how that's going, not so well. That being a carbon sink, not really a good plan. So we've got essentially one left, which is the land. Now, humanity is missing some odd trillions of trees. We can plant trillions of trees. That will be a buffer. It is a necessary step, but it is terrestrial carbon, meaning it's going to cycle through the life of the tree. It's not stored forever. The only way to remove carbon in the kind of quantity that we need to move in order to stabilize the climate is to put it back in the soil. That's where it came from. Yes, much of it was in the form of oil and gas and coal and such. But the soil, due to the ability of the soil to essentially be a carbon matrix, has the ability to sequester the entire teraton, meaning the entire 1,000 billion tons, 1,000 gigatons. Billion tons is a gigaton, right? So how does that work? Well, good soil is 50% carbon by weight. You can pick a handful of black soil up. The reason it's black is the black is carbon. You pick a handful of unhealthy soil up, which is mostly what you'll find in any agricultural area in the United States, even overseas. If you actually get out of your car and go to that field that you're driving by, or get out of the plane and drive there, you go into the field, you're going to pick up this stuff that's kind of like sand. The silica is what's left, right? And when you rebuild topsoil, you build it with carbon. That carbon is part of the terrestrial cycle for the most part. But what we know in study after study, inside a regenerative system, the microbes in the plants are bringing that down into what's called the recalcitrant layers of the soil. The layers that are well and truly below the topsoil. We're talking about subsoil, substrate, and it goes down into that area and can stay for thousands of years. So we're literally sitting on a carbon sponge. The microbes do the hard work. We just have to manage the system. It's not controlling nature, but it is management. We're managing nature right now. We're just doing it like a drunk person driving a car by grabbing onto the rearview mirror and putting it in reverse. That's how we're managing nature. We haven't admitted that we're doing it, so we're doing it completely backwards. So it's like the first step to really realizing where we're at in this process is, yeah, we're managing it. We're just managing it like in the most crazy, insane way. And the second step is to realize the vast potential. The US has 900 million production acres of agriculture. Most of that is rangeland. We look at the world, 2/3 of which is desertified. It's been denuded of topsoil. Most of the 2/3 of the planet is rangeland. So it's range and grassland where we need to focus. We can't plant trees on those areas because there's not enough rainfall, because we've changed the ecosystem, we've changed the water cycle, but we can get tall grasses to grow. And for every little bit of grass that you see above ground, the root structure is generally 2, 3, 4, 5 times as deep. That's the root structure that pumps carbon down. So how do we get those tall grasses to grow? We managed grazers. We managed hooved herding herbivores, mostly cows, but bison as well, across the land. And they create this growth system. And when it's done well, Lewis and Clark, when they came across America, in their journals, they talked about tall grass prairies that were as tall as the top of their horses, right? So you imagine these the horses they're riding across the country, these things are quite tall. This is, 4, 5, 6 feet of grass, meaning 18, 20, 24 feet, 30 feet of roots down below, pumping carbon down into the recalcitrant layers of the soil. This is why we had the ecosystem we had, tall grasses. So if we want to sequester, not the 50, not the yearly emission of carbon dioxide, we want to sequester the legacy load, the stuff that's actually affecting the atmosphere right now. We've got to recreate the tall grass prairies in the 2/3 of the planet where we've stripped the topsoil and turned it mostly to desert. That can be done. It can be done in 3 to 5 years in most places. In the longer areas where there's less rainfall, yeah, you're looking at a 5 to 10 year cycle, but it's not that long. It's a quick turnaround. It's faster than any technological development. So, yes, Bill Gates, good question, but I think you need to broaden your thinking and really look at, and by the way, Microsoft is a huge investor, huge in soil carbon. So it's surprising to see him talking about such small numbers when, his team is obviously thinking much broader. And that's the big hope.
It's terrific. So I love the answer on not just thinking about the flows, but also the stock of carbon dioxide. And while I took some good things away from Bill Gates's book, I'm, as a political scientist, I'm a professor of political science, I was a little disheartened by his message right off the bat, chapter 1, where he says, I don't have the political answers to this question. I'm like, well, okay, That's where we need to start. So you and I share the skeptical reaction. But
I like that he's thinking about it, and I like that he's putting it forward, and just want the yes and it's not a no but. It's like great, and 1,000 gigatons as well, and of course that doesn't negate all the things that we are doing as a society to move to more of a carbon neutrality in general. That's all going to be necessary too, from wind to solar to electric cars, all of that energy efficiency, biking, walking, decentralizing our sort of suburban, mentality. All of that is critical, but we don't get there just with efficiency, unfortunately.
That's right. And I mean, in a sense, the problem is even worse than what you said, because you talked about, during the pandemic, yes, we reduced emissions, but we didn't eliminate them by any stretch of the imagination. Planet wide, even at the peak, the peak of the pandemic I'm talking about, we only reduced it by something like 20% of sort of the emissions, the pre-pandemic emissions. So a long way to go, and a demonstration of just how big our challenge is. Technical challenge, economic challenge, and political challenge of trying to address.
Look at what that 20% did. I mean, it was remarkable. We thought that we were experiencing the changes of the reduction of all of those emissions. And I think I'm looking forward to seeing the studies that come out that really show what those effects were. I mean, that little bit can go a long way. And I did see a question here that was, why didn't we include other forms of solutions for climate change, that we really just focused on soil regeneration as our message and we didn't really address other things? And it's a great question. We have had, like I said, different versions where we do cover that more. And we have, this is our 15th film. And so we did 4 films that were just about, the new green barrel of solutions, how to reduce emissions, all of these things. Like, we've been working on these environmental issues. Josh has for over 20 years. I have now for 15 years. And I think the reason why we focused on soil regeneration solely, we acknowledge in the film there are other things that we need to do, and we have to do those things. It's a given. This doesn't work unless all of those other things are also done, which includes reducing emissions. But the thing of it is like, it was like the elephant that was in the room that nobody was talking about because there was a lack of awareness. I realized, like, now in 2021, regeneration is starting to become a theme. But when we started talking about it back in 2013, you couldn't look up regeneration on Google and have it tell you what soil regeneration was. It didn't exist.
It's in Wikipedia now.
This language that we have in 2021 didn't exist when we started in 2013. And so we're all learning this together. But for us to talk about seriously reversing climate change and to not talk about drawdown, or for most people on the planet, 99% of the people on the planet, to not even know what drawdown is, means that we're not even in the game. We're not even, like, there's no conversation about reversing climate change unless we're including that conversation about soil regeneration and drawdown. And until now, there has been no global conversation about that. There's been no, we had to reach the tipping point just to get the basic information out about the fact that we can draw down 1,000 gigatons of carbon and take that legacy load out of the atmosphere. Like, that's news, And so we had to focus just on that. And there was so much more that we wanted to talk about in the film but we had to kind of stay focused on really driving home this point of carbon that's up there, the carbon that's in the ocean, it can go back down. And anything that wasn't that kind of ended up falling to the wayside because we only had about 90 minutes to keep people's attention and take them through a lot of territory.
That is great. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to turn to the Q&A from the students. And so I want to ask you a somewhat annoying question, so forgive me up front, but I want you to help us work through it. If no-till farming is so great, the answer to so many problems, then why isn't everyone doing it? And I think that part of the answer has to do with the incentives that the USDA gives to farmers. But you're the experts, so tell me what's going on here. What's the obstacle to no-till farming?
Well, the first obstacle is cultural, ethnographic, anthropological. we've been practicing agriculture as a species for the better part of 10,000 years, since the retreat of the ice sheets. Every major civilization that has practiced agriculture the way we do has collapsed, including those in the Native American civilizations of the Anasazi, Inca, Maya, Aztec. So, we have kind of this romantic idea that there was a time when we got agriculture right. And the historical and anthropological records show that that's absolutely not the case. And look, it's easy to romanticize about the past, right? That doesn't mean that hunter-gatherer civilizations and societies didn't practice some form of rudimentary regeneration. They were following, as predators, they were following bison and buffalo and other four-legged creatures. So they were participating in an established cycle of regeneration, right? But anybody who's practiced agriculture, for the most part, unless it's, some form of hunter-gatherer, has pretty much, screwed it up. And not in a small way, but, the pyramids and the great edifices of civilizations that have passed remain as our reminders that this is an experiment that we have yet to get right. When they say they're practicing medicine, well, we're practicing agriculture and we're pretty bad at it. So for 10,000 years, we've got it wrong. And Toynbee, has in his incredible treatise of civilizations, he's detailed all the civilizations that died from this. We're doing exactly the same thing again. We're just doing it on a global scale, and we're trying to get the developing continents to do it as well. We're trying to get India to do it. We're trying to get Africa to do it the same way, plow and till as much as possible, and add chemicals when the soil degrades. The problem is it is a short-term solution, right? You start off with tall grasses, or you start off with prairie, or you start off with forest, and you have to break the soil to plant. You have to create flat, arable land in order to practice this thing called grain harvesting. So in doing that, you begin to break down the soil. Now, if that's all we did, if we just went, okay, we're going to create some flat arable land here, and now we're going to regenerate an ecosystem, we're going to plant into that ecosystem, and we're going to keep that ecosystem going. We're going to manage it. That's different than what we do. We go, well, if the ecosystem keeps trying to come back, there's these things called weeds that keep trying to come back. We'll just plow them in. That's the solution to the ecosystem trying to regenerate. That's our solution. It's a 10,000-year-old bad solution. So really what this represents, yes, does the USDA encourage bad agriculture through crop subsidies? Yes, absolutely. The majority of what we grow in the United States is corn, soy, hay, and wheat. And all of it's chemically treated. It's none of it's food. Vast majority, 5%, maybe that is human food. So it's really an animal feed subsidized system whereby meat packers and grocers make a lot of money from other people's work, and they extract whatever minerals were in the soil. It's just like oil refining. You extract the oil. These guys extract minerals, and the bulk of the profits go not to the people doing the work. So I think we need to think culturally and at a level of civilization, what's the next step? Because the inevitable future, unless we change, is that we will have more of what we did in the past. We haven't changed the behavior, so we can anticipate more of what we have, right? You can't expect a different result by doing the same thing, especially doing it larger with more fossil fuel machinery than we've ever done it before. Jared Diamond wrote a great book about this. It's called Collapse for a reason, right? So we ostensibly don't want to be the 25th major civilization or whatever it is in the list. In order to do that, we're going to have to integrate these two systems which have been developed. The system which was necessary to get us here, which was destroying and denuding the land of all life, and the system which nature came up with before we decided that we were going to stay in one place and make grains, which was ecology based on regeneration. And when we talk about regenerative agriculture, it is a new way of thinking. We are saying, take the bet. We're not saying get rid of agriculture, okay? 10 billion humans are going to be relying on agriculture by 2050. And we're also not saying get rid of nature, which has been the thinking up till now. It's take these two systems merge them, use biomimicry, use the understanding of soil, microbes, nature, management, productivity to create an agriculture that mimics nature, in which you grow far more nutrition per acre than you did before. And that is counterintuitive from 10,000 years of doing it the wrong way. That's the biggest impediment. The USDA is an expression of bad practices that we've done for a long time. And we're going to have a breakthrough if we want to have any form of peaceful global society in 2050, because that's when sort of these curves of, topsoil and species decline, they all start to intersect. So we've got a little time to figure this out, and I think we will. I'm hopeful.
Good. Well, I'm going to turn now. I think we have a little time, but the emphasis on little on that, because those curves come down awfully fast. But I'm going to turn to some of the questions that we're getting in from students, and I'm just going to read them. And so we've got a great question right off the bat from Srinivas, who asks, would you advocate that we all become vegan or at least vegetarian?
You want me to do it, or you want to do it?
I think, we are, first of all, we're not telling people what they should or shouldn't eat. What we are talking about is a new food system, a new model for a food system, one that's not based on scarcity and survival, which is how ours has been created. But let's scrap that system and talk about, how can we grow nutrient dense food? How can we increase the carrying capacity? How can we, have these tall grasses? And then, we encourage people to eat a regenerative diet. So specifically what we say in the film is, yes, we absolutely do need to eat less meat than what we've been eating. Certainly CAFO meat, it's got to go. That is an inhumane system. It's a system that doesn't work. Talk about emissions. That's, the opposite of what we want.
Define CAFO.
A CAFO is a confined animal feed operation where cows are segregated from the land. So Josh described the system where we can build topsoil, we can draw down carbon, where you have ruminants, which, in America, it's been bison, buffalo, other types of ruminants, building that fertile topsoil. But, through our agriculture, through tilling, it's such an easy way to go, easy, quick crop, got a great harvest. I'm 7th generation minimum farming family. They were pioneers. They're like, we're going to get here. We're going to make some food now. And it not thinking 7 generations ahead, not thinking about right now, and so we have to reinvent that model. And so what we put in our mouth is going to determine what model we're participating in. If somebody is going to eat meat, it needs to be grown out in nature, regeneratively. It needs to be participating in drawdown. And of course, it needs to be humane, because the way that it's currently being done, it's not only inhumane to the animals, but it's part of what's destroying our environment. So no more CAFO meat, period. But in terms of regenerative meat, by participating in a system as was done before we started this chemical agricultural system, there is abundance, and there is room for people to make choices, healthy choices that don't degrade the environment. It's been easy just to point to cows as being the source of the problem, but actually cows are part of the solution, and we need cows out on land, roaming free, helping us to draw down carbon and methane into the soil, all the things that they can do when they're out in the field versus when we eat meat that comes from that confined animal feed operation. It's not a yes or no answer. I know you're looking for a simple answer there, but I think it's a personal choice. For many people, it's a spiritual choice. And, but they're showing that there's certain things that minerals that we can only get through animals when they can eat a pine cone. We can't digest a pine cone, but through eating an animal, we can get the minerals that they would get from that pine cone. And so, there are ways to work around eating meat if that's what you're committed to, and there's a way to participate in eating meat in a way that is regenerative.
It's a terrific answer. I haven't eaten beef for 25 years, so your film actually gave me some hope that I might do so in the future, because I do enjoy it, but I haven't had it in a long time. I'm going to move to Jorge's question, and it's kind of a long question, so I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. But he asks, that you've talked a little bit about how the soil can absorb carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, but what about phosphorus? It has to come from somewhere as we in the system, and so the question is, do we have to bring in more in the form of fertilizers, or is there some other kind of bioaccessible form to bring in phosphorus into the cycle?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, especially in light of what's happening in Florida with the phosphorus plant that's, on the verge of God knows what, exploding or rupturing or just causing a lot of problems in the Tampa Bay. We have tremendous phosphorus reserves on planet Earth, and this is a big question. How do we want to practice agriculture? The soil, for the most part, inherently has phosphorus. And again, in a complex ecosystem in which you have cover crops and you're planting some kind of harvestable crop, you've got mycorrhizal fungi. And when you have that network, it's a network of fungi that connect plant roots together. Plant roots actually make requests through the microbial network and through the mycorrhizal fungi of the things that they need, specifically minerals. They're conveyed throughout the mycorrhizal fungi network and throughout the microbial network to that plant. So we kind of think of soil as this thing that gives the plant what it needs. But the truth is that soil is really just, that's what holds the plant up, right? Really what gives the plant what it needs is microbial life and the mycorrhizal fungi. So if you degrade the soil and you remove the mycorrhizal fungi or you make it dormant, there's nothing to convey the minerals from the soil substrates. There's nothing to move it around. It's like there's no highways down there, right? That's mostly what we've done. So, in the natural systems where we're seeing regeneration practiced, they're not adding phosphorus. There's no phosphorus being added. And I think that answers the question.
Great. Very well explained. I'm going to ask Anne's question, which I think you're going to like a lot. It's a lovely question. So the question is, it's two-part. How widely are regenerative practices being embraced and adopted in the US and elsewhere? And what can those of us who found the film inspirational do to help those practices become more widely used?
I'll do the first part, and that is the adoption of this set of practices, and it's really a set of 4 or 6 principles, is growing rapidly. When we did the film, Gabe Brown, who's the rancher in the movie, he was managing his ranch, 4,500 acres. The demand for his knowledge has exploded. He has teamed up with an entire team of people. Together, they're managing 22 million acres as of today. That number is rapidly expanding as the phone calls keep pouring in from all sorts of interesting people all over the world. But I think that we can safely say that 10% of the US ag land will be into regenerative transition the next 3 to 5 years, if not more. And it seems like, only 10%. Oh, that's not enough. Well, consider this. It took 50 years to put 5 million acres into organic production in the US. We put 22 million acres into transition in less than 6 months. So this is picking up. It's going to pick up rapidly. There are whole nations are beginning to adopt this. Very simple. If you want more nutrition per acre and you want to feed more people, there's no other system that does it like this. So that's going to fuel the adoption of this more than anything else. Do you want to take the second part of the question?
Yeah, I think the second part of the question is, what can those of us who found the film inspirational do to help these practices become more widely used? This is a unique question. It's not what can I do? This is how can people spread the message is what I'm hearing in this. And I think that's why we made the movie, was to get this basic concept across. We wanted to reach the tipping point so that you guys could figure out how to get us out of this mess. This is the end of our very first movie. It was called Fuel. The very last line of the journey, it's Josh, and he goes, I've taken you this far. The rest of the journey is up to you. And I think, we're not sitting here saying we actually have the solution to anything. We have just been talking to people who are able to say, look, the science is telling us that we can regenerate the planet, and this is how we can do it. And our job was to get that message to you, which now we've successfully done. And I think really you guys are the leaders of this movement. You're going to be on this planet longer than we are, so you're really going to see the effects of what we're doing.
Not that much longer.
But I think, first of all, the first thing that we can do, like what we've done, is spreading the message of regeneration as far and wide as possible. There's two huge myths that we have to overcome. The first myth is that, we have to control nature, and the cows are bad, and we need to, do it in this way so that we can feed people, and we're going to do it using chemicals, and a bunch of people are going to get rich in the process of doing that. That's a huge myth, that we have to feed the world that way. We need to get people back in touch with how food is actually grown, back in touch with, how we can actually have nutrient-dense food, see how we're connected. Our flora is connected to the mycorrhizal fungi. I mean, they're not just communicating with each other, they're communicating with us too. There's this natural wisdom in regenerative agriculture. So we have to break that myth. The second thing that we have to do is really just be, it sounds so cliche, but be every time that we're making a food choice, just really committed to participating in the regenerative food system and showing other people how to do it. And it really involves, community organizing. It involves farmers market. It involves talking to farmers. It involves having uncomfortable conversations. I mean, you can imagine the conversation I'm having with my dad, who's a conventional farmer of soy and corn, who wants to die with Roundup in his hands. I mean, these are conversations that are going to happen with our family, with our parents, with our neighbors, and sometimes they're really unpleasant. And overcoming the blame and the anger of the fact that we've gotten ourselves into this situation, combined with how stubborn farmers are. I mean, we're farmers. My dad's a farmer. Farmers are stubborn, and so we're really going to have to shake that system up. It's going to take a lot of compassion, a lot of understanding, and just being so committed to the solution, to whatever your version of that solution is, because this is your movement now.
Terrific. I'm going to read Timothy's question, which takes us in a different direction. What is your view of the EV, electric vehicle, car, and battery investment phenomenon we see in the stock market? And is the hype and the related required mining for battery material worth our time and attention compared to carbon capture using land resources?
Well, it's a good question. And obviously we got a little bogey here.
Fantastic. Come join the party.
Jedi. He's
He's also happy to answer questions.
He's our lead researcher here at Big Picture Ranch. He's going to answer the battery EV question.
Is this an EV, Jedi? No. Oh, no, it's not.
Big
well, he's a redhead, so automatically he's in my good books. All right, good people.
Fossil fuels in our toys. Look, I think, Amory Lovins is really the preeminent researcher on this issue. And if you read his white papers, here's somebody who's literally studied this at the level of government, at the level of, international authority. It's pretty clear that, yes, we have some massive and difficult trade-offs when it comes to fossil fuels. Overall, the damage that's being done to manufacture EV batteries and the whole battery infrastructure is less than the damage that's being done to continue the fossil fuel industry. I grew up in a place called Cancer Alley. It's a stretch of interstate between Baton Rouge and Houston. There are 150 petrochemical facilities and a 100-mile stretch of land. The average cancer incidence is 800 times the national average. There's water pollution, there's air pollution, there's land pollution. This is the fossil fuel industry is kind of this NIMBY. It's not in my backyard. We don't see it. We don't talk about it. We're not related to it. We have very, very, very little understanding of what that infrastructure really takes from the planet and from life. But it is a massive cost, and it's ongoing. We didn't pay it once, we pay it yearly. And it's Cost is extreme. So, you know, are we at a point where we can say, look, we're really in sustainable manufacturing when it comes to EV batteries? No, I don't think we're in that point for most things that we manufacture. Probably 98% of what we manufacture is extracted at this point. Could we see that future if we keep pushing? Yes. There are batteries made from carbon lattice work, kind of a carbon fiber process. So you're literally talking about a basic molecule, a fundamental element that could be the building block for the next generation of batteries. Can't do that with fossil fuels. You're just going to keep extracting and destroying ecosystems. Hard to, the more you destroy an ecosystem, the harder it is to regenerate it, bear in mind. So yeah, trade-offs. It's not a perfect thing. It is a better, and I think we need to keep pushing. We need to keep holding those companies to account that manufacture those batteries and push and push and push and push until we do get to sustainable manufacturing. And that may take some time, but we're not going to get there with fossil fuels. That's a dead.
All right. I have another question here from Arjun, and at least on my screen you have frozen, so I hope that you will come back very quickly. So hopefully it's on my end and not yours. But let me read Arjun's question. So the question is, what do you think is the best strategy for trying to create this new food system / agricultural model? Where should we focus our efforts? And should the focus be on influencing individual consumers or educating farmers or producers or pressuring legislators to make regulatory changes? Folks, I think we've lost them, which is unfortunate. I'm hoping that they'll come back very shortly, but if they don't, then we might have to call it a day. But let's give them a minute to see whether they'll pop back on. Well, on some level, it's comforting to know that I am not the only one who has Wi-Fi issues and occasionally gets booted off of Zoom meetings. But it looks like we probably lost them, at least for a while. And so my suggestion is that we maybe just give them one more minute and then we'll call it a day. It's too bad because we have such good questions here. Aha, they're back. There they are.
Sorry about that. We had a just epic computer
Battery fail.
kid computer fail. I don't know.
Well, thank you guys for coming back. I was worried.
Oh no, it looks like we only lost a few people. Thanks everybody for sticking on there.
Yeah. Terrific. I'm glad you're back. I was going to read to you Arjun's question, if I could. And this comes back maybe to Rebecca's message about this being, their movement as much as yours now. But let me ask you, I mean, so they've asked for a little bit of direction, or Arjun's asked for a little bit of direction in terms of what do you think is the best strategy for trying to create this new food system and agricultural model? And in particular, should the focus be on influencing individual consumers or educating farmers or pressuring legislators to make changes?
Yes.
Yeah, all of the above. All of the above. And I think that there's another piece to this puzzle that most people don't think about, which is the food system itself. So, we have packagers, grocers, we've got entities like Costco, Whole Foods, Walmart. Organic foods is now the #1 growing food sector in the United States. And organic is nice, but it protects you against chemicals is what it does. It doesn't regenerate the soil and sequester carbon. It's not a pathway forward for humanity. So, really, we have to attack the system where the money is being made. The money's not being made by the farmers. They're in, tremendous debt. The money's not being made by consumers, who are beholden to buy these products. Money's being made by the middle people. And I think those are the ones that are influencing legislation, they're influencing the direction of agriculture, They're influencing banks, which are making loans to farmers. You know, we've also got chemical companies that are making tremendous sums of money off of the debt farmer game, right? So we've got companies like Bayer and Monsanto that are doing quite well. And I'm quite happy to keep this system in free fall because, you know,
the more we go, the more we need them. It's just,
yeah, the more we poison, the more profit they make. So I think we've got to, yes, consumers have power. Yes, legislation has power, but we've got to look at it as a system, and the head of the system is really where the profits are being made. That's where we've got profit pressure.
Thank you. I mean, so as a consumer, when I go to the grocery store, I see products labeled organic all over the grocery store. I don't yet see products labeled regenerative. And can you imagine that in the future? Do you expect there'll be a label in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to see this within the next year or two, this kind of, and where there's not a label, there'll be some QR code, a form of transparency where you could, you know, you pick up the bread and it's got a QR code on the back. It says, scan this to see the ingredients, where they were grown, who grew them. And it goes beyond a label. I think what we really are looking for is, you know, sort of transparency and point of origin labeling, where we know, okay, great, this is grown, this is not glyphosate Roundup GMO wheat. This is blue Salish. It's grown by Susan. Here's a picture of Susan. I'm, oh, great, thank you. And here's her family, and here's, oh, and then it's processed over here in Minneapolis, and it got shipped to my grocery store. Okay, cool, I get it. Thank you. I now have a supply chain, accountability. I've got people's faces. I've got email address. I got Instagram accounts. I know where my food came from. And that's going to be the new trend in food. That's going to be, you're not going to pick up a box of cheddar, whatever, without having a thing where you can scan it. The next trend is going to be, and we're going to show this in our new movie, is going to be something called spectral imaging, which I believe in the next 3 to 5 years will be built into your smartphone. Spectral imaging with a database of high and low points for nutrition and food. Got some running commentary from
That's all right.
somebody who's still recovering from chocolate from Easter Sunday.
So you didn't like chocolate anymore.
Right, yeah. Anyway, the point is spectral imaging is going to allow you to take your phone and scan a piece of food in the grocery store. It's going to tell you, okay, this is how much glyphosate is in it. This is how much nutrition is in it. This apple versus this apple. So I think there are tools that are coming quickly, and it's going to really change the consumer power in terms of food.
And also, like, what we're talking about right now is getting more boxes from a big box. You know, like the nature of even having this conversation in a way is reflective of the model that we're currently in. You know, like if we really want to have a regenerative food system, right? Like the meat that we're getting, you're not going to go scan it, and you know, yes, we need that. You need
I
that.
might scan it.
Yeah, but like ideally, your meat would be grown locally by someone that you know, and ideally, the vegetables that you eat would be grown locally. Hopefully, we're reducing the amount of food that we're eating out of boxes that we're buying from big box stores, and because that's not really a food system. You know, that system is the same system that makes sure that we buy our grains that have just been sprayed with glyphosate so that they can last longer on the shelf inside the box where we just got them. But like some of the richest cultures in the world where people don't have a lot of money are able to have community-oriented food where, you know, people are part of the system of growing food, and they're actually healthier because they're eating food that's grown locally, that's nutrient dense, that, you know, it's just a different food system, you know, and it's not one where you have to have just like a bunch of rich people to participate in that system. This is this community oriented system. I mean, most farmers are actually really sick because they don't eat the food that they grow. They eat the box, the food that comes out of the box from the store down the street, that, you know, and they're not actually eating the food they're growing because you can't eat most of the food that we're growing in the United States. So if we really want to be radical, you know, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can still start planting a community garden. You can still start looking at what's a totally different food system model that we can take on. And this isn't our normal Q&A answer, because normally we're talking to people who have purchasing power, or moms or that kind of thing, who are already in this system, and they're looking to make some kind of incremental change in their life. But I feel like this conversation with you all right now really is you seeing, as the future leaders of this movement, like what's my role in that? And I really think that, first of all, that's where all the money is going to be made in the future. I mean, this is a huge boom that's about to happen. But it's also one that everybody can participate in, no matter where they're from. And that's really regenerative when it's local. When you're eating something that's got shipped from halfway around the world, it's not really regenerative.
And look, I think we're always going to have grocery stores, and there are certainly a lot of people that do not have the ability and the access to locally grown food at this point. And that is an ongoing issue where we have to apply pressure. We have to create avenues for access. And that's a big task, it's a big issue.
Yeah. Well, so that's actually a decent segue to our next question from Barbara Clark. She asks, unfortunately, regeneratively grown foods are more expensive than conventionally produced foods, so as to be inaccessible to people living in poverty. And so what do you see as a solution to this?
Yeah, this is, this goes into a different realm of kind of meta questions, which is, why do we have poverty in a country where we're throwing away 40% of our food? This is a strange system. Who designed such a system? Is that a good capitalist model where people starve and we throw away our food, almost half of it, before it even gets to the shelf? I think the hope is, look, there are short-term problems that this system, that it just are inherent to the current food system that have little or nothing to do with regeneration. Can we look toward medium-term and long-term solutions that will both create regeneration and deal with some of these inadequacies, some of these injustices, of which, look, poverty is a I would consider that to be among the greatest injustices. During COVID, the number of families that are at or below the poverty line or hovering around the poverty line in the United States expanded exponentially to where we had almost 2 out of 5 families in the US not knowing where their next meal came from. So I think we have bigger questions that anytime we talk about agriculture, so like all of a sudden we're talking about social justice, we're talking about water supplies, and why are water supplies being poisoned around the country? Why is, these things are connected to the runoff of agricultural chemicals. Why do we have a massive poverty issue if we're one of the richest nations that pioneered the modern capitalist society? I mean, that's a threat to national security, but it's bigger than that. It's a threat to our moral fabric as a country. I think that inside redesigning agriculture, we start to see a lot of potential for a confluence of social justice where there is injustice, equity where there is inherent inequity in the system. And we see, okay, look, there are people trapped inside freeways where they do not have access to, never mind regenerative, they barely have access to fresh, these food deserts. So how do we begin to break into that? How do we get people into urban gardens, as Rebecca mentioned, or how do we get urban gardens into the urban places, or how do we get food? These are huge questions, probably not simply answered in this Q&A, but I'd say that this is the task of the regenerative movement, because you can't just go, well, we're going to make the world better and sequester carbon. It's like, yeah, we're also going to grow way more food, which means now we have to figure out how we're going to get that food to people in an equitable, just way. And look at all the potential jobs that there are inside this new realm of agriculture. Look at all the potential avenues for work that exist. Rebecca and I obviously don't have all of these answers, but we're hyper aware of the questions, and we're looking at addressing more and more of them in the upcoming films, you know.
I think in the ideal world, we have food that is affordable but not cheap. You know, food that is grown, you know, in the ideal world. How can we grow our food locally? You know, honestly, that's going to be the healthiest food for you, is the food that's grown closest to where you are by the people who are eating it. You know, that's going to be the system that works, one that mimics the way that a system that involves having the nature look the way it did before we came in and disturbed it. That's going to be the one that's most abundant, and ironically, the one that's ultimately the cheapest if we can find our way there.
And another thing to consider about the price of food in the US, you know, the price of food since the 1950s has plummeted, the real price of food in the US, as healthcare costs have skyrocketed. So what's happened is, in terms of median family income, we're paying twice as much for healthcare and half as much for food. And now we have dietary related diseases that are endemic to our society. So diabetes, cancer, all of these things have shot through the roof. And it's directly related to what we're putting in our bodies and the chemicals that we're exposed to. Of course, much of those chemicals are involved in the agricultural process. So we have traded, you know, in essence, we've traded a good meal for the fast and cheap meal. That doesn't mean that, boy, we're going to have instant access to good food for everybody. But it's a good place to start realizing that our culture, when it comes to food, and our brains have been hijacked. So the first step is realizing, hey, you know, some very crafty people saw this a long time ago, and they managed to create a system that lulled us into a sense of security. And unfortunately, we got very sick because of it. It's going to take something to break that system up and to build something new.
Great. Well, you've mentioned next films a couple of times, and so I want to ask you about that. But there's one more question here that I don't want to miss. It's from Tom. He says, "How will regeneration meet the investment requirements of the top 1% who have enormous sums invested in land?"
Well, Tom, this is the good news. Wherever there's more nutrition to make per acre, there's more money to make per acre. I mean, essentially, you can boil the wealth of any civilization down to the carbon in its soil. That is the base measure of a civilization, its ability to create sustenance for its population. And so we go, okay, well, maybe we do micro civilizations, like look at the United Arab Emirates, doesn't have a lot of carbon in its soil, right? Well, in fact, it did. It had very deep, rich carbons, and it sold those into the fossil fuel industry. So we tend to look toward the economy of the future as an expression of nutrition per acre. Nutrition per acre is directly related to carbon in soil. No carbon in soil, you're not going to be able to store water. You can't store water. You don't have microbes. You don't have microbes. You don't have nutrition, right? And so if you begin to refocus economy, you know, because we don't have a fiat currency, we're not tied to gold. But certainly if we don't feed people, the economy goes away very quickly. And the rule of law becomes replaced with the rule of gun. And that's what we see in countries that starvation happens as a result of desertification, which happens more and more each year. We see mass migrations. And so that's the bad future. That's the alternative future that we don't want. The future that we do want is we go, okay, look at this as a long-term investment. You're not going to get a quarterly return, but you are going to get 5-year and 10-year annuation that is going to be far beyond where your quarterly returns were coming from when you were invested in the bad chemical companies and the bad agricultural companies that were destroying the planet. Because you're going to be producing more calories. And ultimately, that is the most saleable, most inelastic commodity on earth, aside from water, is food. So, you know, it requires a different line of thinking in terms of investment. Much of the investment world and banking world is centered on quarterly profits and quarterly returns. Nature does not return on a quarterly basis, but it really does return well on a 5-year and 10-year annuation. And that's when we start to incorporate that kind of thinking, the potential wealth upside is dramatic.
Great answer. So tell us a little bit about what you're planning for your next project, and I'll say projects with an S, it sounds like. So tell us what you're working on.
The next one is a follow-up to Kiss the Ground. It really dives deeply into the sort of corruption of chemical companies in the space. And also, most importantly, it shows how farmers can make a profit and in making that bold, brave transition away from conventional ag towards regenerative ag.
Yeah. And I think we've got, since we started on Kiss the Ground, the just reams of peer-reviewed science and data, and data that's the same here in the United States as well as overseas. That's really come a long way in 7 years. So we're going to be showing a lot of new science. We're going to be showing a lot of bulletproof kind of really powerful information in terms of how we turn the big system around, the billions of acres of planet Earth. And that's very exciting stuff.
Do you have a title?
Jaw-dropping. Our jaws have been like this as we've been processing all of the information.
It's amazing.
Coming in.
It's this movement is growing so fast, and we're looking at potentially.
There's another movie that's
multiple
like
projects.
Wanting to be born. That's about the movement of regeneration.
Yeah.
It's really more of not so much the science or the money or the farming, but more about like the collective movement of regeneration and what that looks like on a global scale. That kind of groundswell.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Does the next movie have a title yet, or is that still top secret?
But we're probably not going to reveal it just yet.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to have you back when you're ready for the big reveal.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you. I'm a parent myself, and so I appreciate very much the time that you're taking away from your kids, and in some ways, including them.
He's watching you right now. He's
One
like
of them
totally,
has insisted on being involved.
yeah, totally paying
He's
attention.
a little bit. He's halfway to a nap.
He has got some incredible passive resistance skills already. So
Putting him to sleep.
Hopefully the people who are still watching are still awake.
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we still have a core audience here. Thank you so much.
People to fall asleep, talk about dirt.
Yeah. That guy at the party on the swings by himself, talking about soil again.
Stop talking about dirt. That's us.
No, I think it is just remarkable. I mean, what you just said about how you've reached 1 billion people. Yes, this movie took a number of years to make, but not very many of us get to reach 1 billion people. So congratulations. I realize that the film has received a lot of attention. Actually, you were telling me a little bit just before we went live with the event. Can you just say a couple of words about the awards?
Well, he had said that like being online schooling has been different as probably filmmaking has been. And I had said that when we actually started a year ago, we thought we were going to go premiere Tribeca on Earth Day. And we couldn't have imagined that the whole world was about to shut down. And actually, since then, the film has won 52 awards at film festivals, and we didn't attend a single one. But the flip side is actually that's good for the environment. So we'll take that as a win.
I guess you went to the OHI premiere, right?
Yeah, but we didn't win an award there.
It
doesn't count.
There was a drive-in, a local drive-in that showed it.
All right. Well, yeah, if you don't win an award, I mean, you were barely there. Forget it.
But it was the only film festival that we actually went to, was the one here in our town at a drive-in.
Well, I mean, you put a very positive spin on it, but I feel for you because you've made this incredible movie, and this is sort of your moment of triumph. And so I wish that you've been able to get to Tribeca.
Well, you're never famous in your own hometown, right? So.
Yeah. And nonetheless, the film has made a huge impact and hopefully given you the resources to make the next film or films. And so congratulations. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us today, Jeff. And thanks to all of the, Brown University students and staff, everybody who chimed in and watched and asked questions. Thank you very much.
Can't wait to see what you guys do next. We still meet students from Q&As we did 14 years ago, and now we're meeting them and they're out there saving the world. So I'm excited to meet all of you one day and hear what you're doing.
Terrific. Well, it's a pleasure having you here, and we'll hope to see you again.
Sounds good. Thank you.